Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on for the third time, Laura Savino. We actually did this one pretty close to the last one, but one of the main reasons we wanted to have you come back on, Laura, is all this calorie surplus talk, right? And so I think this will be a good kind of nuanced discussion around this topic, and again, different rationales for calorie surplus, maybe when it's not. And so I think again, it'll be cool to kind of hear both of our kind of approaches to it. Typically, I would do an update, but I mean, it's only been a couple weeks. But has anything happened for you in the last couple weeks or anything like that?
I think the most important part for me is that it has snowed in the mountains and I'm no longer doing zone 2 cardio inside. I am snowboarding outside.
Oh,
So
sweet.
that's my biggest and only life update in the last few weeks.
No, that's nice. So you do snowboarding and stuff for your zone two?
Yes. It's not real zone 2 if we go by the rules, but if I'm going to go outside and play outside for 3 hours straight, I'm going to call that my cardio day for the
Yeah.
week. And I'm not going to go add more time on the bike because it wasn't a continuous zone session.
Plus, I mean, I feel like, if you're not trying to like be, like a endurance runner or endurance athlete, it's like, I mean, it's cool to have that kind of nuance around like your training zones and stuff. But I think again, finding something that you can do regularly um is is where it's at anyways, even if it's not technically your quote unquote exact zone two or whatever that may be.
Totally. And we think about periodizing for the seasons too. Like the spring and fall are for doing more structured cardio sessions. And if you live anywhere where you can get outside, I'd rather just spend it outside. So okay, hey, does this check the box? Like, yeah, I got my heart rate up, did a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. Had to eat a lot. So that's my favorite part about winter here is it's a quick drive up on a Tuesday morning, get 3 hours in and come home and be toast.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, a lot of people travel to go snowboard and ski and everything like that, and you can just drive a little bit. What does your so do you monitor your heart rate during that, and like does it end up being lower most of the time then?
Yeah, so it's more honestly, I say zone 2, it's probably more like a sprint interval than anything. So
Gotcha.
when you are snowboarding, it's like a 5 to 8 minute run down straight,
Okay.
and that's definitely sitting to if I decide to go do some more difficult run, that's going to be sit probably spiking into 3 and 4 as you're trying to brace your entire body making turns. So I think my highest on this week was like 165, so it's 4 for me. And then I averaged zone 2. Plus, you're sitting at 13,000 feet. So you're pretty much just
Yeah.
sitting in zone 2, sitting on the chairlift. It's hard to get back out of zone 2 when you're at that high of an elevation.
What do they call that? Train high? What or is it what is it? What's the saying? Like train high, or I can't remember what it is.
I don't know.
Not high in terms of marijuana high, but high is in terms of altitude high there. But
Yes.
cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, that would be freaking awesome to do. I love the mountains. It's always fun to be able to see them. It's just like a terrain that I don't ever really get to see here in the Midwest. I've never gone skiing or snowboarding, and that would be freaking awesome to do. I just have this like super rational fear of like I've just seen people like get like tear their ACL, break their legs, snowboard or skiing, which I mean you could do that literally doing anything, but that's like been
Mhm.
the biggest thing that's always kind of worried me. And just like all the people around and like running into other people and stuff like that.
Dude, that honestly 90% why I switched to snowboarding. 20 years ago, I used to ski, swapped to snowboarding. I was like, okay, if I'm gonna break something, I'd rather it be my wrist or my collarbone and not my like knee in a direction I don't want it to be going. But they actually just opened an indoor snow hill 2 miles away from my house right now where you could do lessons for like a third the cost as you would on the mountains. And I'm like, I think that's a great idea for beginners. We came and like it's a little bit cheaper to come stay where I live and go, okay, I'm gonna do lessons for like 3 days out here and then go on the mountain. And you're like, oh, I can just fall on this like nylon carpet and it's not gonna hurt as much. Get to learn. I feel like that's probably a good safety thing if somebody's gonna try for the first time. So yeah, but I would recommend snowboarding. If you had to pick
Is-
like what you want to break, I feel like a wrist to recover from is a lot easier
Oh yeah.
than an ACL. So
Oh yeah, for sure. Way, yeah. Again, if we're gonna pick injuries here, hopefully that doesn't happen either way. Is
yep.
Would you say snowboarding or skiing's easier?
Skiing is easier to learn, hard to get good at. Snowboarding is hard to learn, much easier to go from like beginner to intermediate.
Interesting.
So
So
it's, yeah,
that's probably why you see most people do skiing when they go, like if they're traveling and like, yeah, from a tourist
yeah.
perspective.
And also if you've ever roller skated or ice skated before, some of the motions that you do in those movements are somewhat similar to skiing.
Mm,
Um, Whereas snowboarding, if you haven't ever, wakeboarding is probably the closest thing to it. If you've never
Yep.
done that, it's just a very different way of moving your body in space. So hard. That's why it's one of the harder ones to learn. But once you can turn left and right, you can get much better at snowboarding very quickly. Skiing, you might be on the beginner hills for quite a bit longer. So.
So what you're saying is you could be doing flips and stuff within like a couple weeks or
Yeah, no, I still don't do flips 20 years in, but that's like personal choice of never going, you know what, that's just the risk reward is not there for me.
risk reward and probably the time commitment you need to get better at it, right? Same thing. Hey, if you don't want to spend a ton of time, like if you don't want to get super jacked, I mean, you just got to weigh the pros and cons of, the time commitment to it. So same thing there. So, cool. Well, yeah, let's chat about the topic today. So again, we wanted to talk about calorie surplus. Again, I feel like it's kind of funny. It seems like for a while it was like pretty well known. Hey, you want to gain weight to build muscle, right? And like that was kind of a well known thing. And then I feel like recently, it's kind of maybe come back around where some people are kind of promoting that you don't necessarily need to. So, I just want to throw it over to you in terms of kind of your thoughts around calorie surplus for muscle growth, and you can kind of hit on your approach, and then if I have any follow up questions, I'll ask, and I'll kind of go over kind of like my thoughts and my approach, and then we'll go from there.
Totally. So I feel like a lot of what's out there right now is until you're in the more advanced stage or late intermediate, maybe you need a build, but you don't need to go into a calorie surplus, especially if you have body comp goals of being leaner. However, when I take a look at 98% of the clients that come to me, they're in a position where they want to be leaner, but they've spent a lifetime dieting before. And they have spent nearly decades from in most cases of dieting, maintenance, dieting, maintenance, dieting, maintenance. And I've gotten to a place where they're just not in a metabolic state to even build muscle. And so I would go, okay, we have done decades of this path that hasn't worked for you. You want to be a more muscular physique. Like we need to put this consistent dieting to the side and go into a calorie surplus, kind of reverse some of that metabolic adaptation that's happened. And I want you to try it. Okay. That's like give it 12 weeks. If you don't want to ride it out into the sunset where we really need to have a little bit more sustained muscle building phase, but for the most part, every single one of them sees some pretty significant metabolic benefits going into a build. And then they have to eat a lot more than they think they do. Because we've spent so much time adapting to lower calories. So I really think there is a spot for pretty much everybody who has any sort of goal of being a little bit muscular to go into a build, period. Like I do see some things out there like, oh, well, if you're above X% body fat, you have no business going into a build phase until you're like into this much, much lower body fat percentage. And I disagree. Mostly because I think there's so many benefits for people to actually eat enough for the first time in your life consistently. And does that mean you have to be an aggressive build? No. But if we can go into a conservative build, we're like, hey, we're just gaining a little bit every single week, and you are feeding yourself and putting yourself into a much healthier space, you're going to be able to set yourself for future fat loss much, much easier. So I don't think I've ever told a client never to do a build phase, regardless of body fat percentage.
And when you say build phase too, like, are you when you can, because feel like some of this is semantics as well too,
Yeah.
right? So like for you specifically, when you say build phase, does that automatically mean someone is going to be in a calorie surplus and they're going to be pushing their weight up a little bit and be in that surplus, or is that
Yes.
basically, are they the same thing for you?
Assuming that they're going into meeting a basic building checklist where I go, okay, are we lifting with the frequency and intensity we need for a build phase? So normally say, hey, are we hitting body parts twice a week? Do you know what repetition failure looks like? If we can check those two boxes, then there we go. Are we sleeping enough? Is stress in a somewhat manageable place? And do we know how to eat our protein, eat in like a calorie range? It's kind of my top like 4 checklist of what does a build look like, or even in a place where we can consider doing this. And I truly mean we're not going to eat at maintenance plus. We are going to at least get into a spot where we are gaining weight for at least 3 to 12 weeks. And I say 3 weeks at the minimum. It's only when we have clients who are in the very, very, very overweight category where I'm like, okay, let's just go for 3 to 5 weeks to make sure that we're actually finding what that top end of maintenance is. And then we're going to just hang at that right around that curve. But pretty much everybody else, I'm like, hey, let's get it for 12 weeks, see what happens. Like, what else are you going to do at this time of year? Too. I mean, like it's early December right now while we're recording. We just wrapped up Thanksgiving last week. There's no better time to be like, let me just focus these calories on this place so I can set myself up for the spring. So yes, I truly mean a build. When we think about that in terms of what does that look like per week, even if we're super conservative, looking at like a pound a month, nothing crazy. So 3 months of going, hey, I'm going to intentionally gain weight. I'm looking at like 3 to 5 pounds gained in 12 weeks. So super conservative. For most people, very few, except for like super newbies who are being a little more aggressive, do I go like, hey, let's push a little more. But like my goal is to just not lose weight over these 12 weeks and push the calories until you actually consistently start gaining.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like as you kind of kept talking, I feel like again, this is where like a lot of people will end up arguing about things, but they're just kind of arguing about like it's just again the semantics more than anything, right? Where it's like again, you're not saying like, hey, you necessarily need to like the big thing is you just don't want to see your weight trend down during this
Yep.
time, right?
Yep.
But you do obviously want to see a little bit of rate of gain, like you said, it ends up being about a pound per month, and kind of like you mentioned, what you do in that process is going to be super important as well too. Like you said, if that training's there, you're pushing that, the other aspects are in check. It's like again that pound is again mostly be it's slow, but it should mostly be muscle anyways, with it coming up like that, anyways. What about from like a water weight fluctuation standpoint, right? Like this is something too where I feel like this can get in people's head as well too. Where like, yeah, I mean, if you come off of a fat loss phase or you come off a phase where you're consuming less calories, whether that's for an extended period of time or whatever it may be, you see those kind of fluctuations on the way up, as well too. Is that something that you factor in? What does that kind of look like? And I'm sure that ranges all over the place in terms of what that number looks like typically.
Yeah, so Jeff, you and I had a conversation offline last week, and I said, hey, this is the scale that I require all my clients to buy. It's a Bluetooth scale that syncs to your phone. And I don't necessarily they don't have to buy that specific scale, but they have to weigh in almost every day of the week. Aside from shift working people, I only have them weigh in the days that they wake up in their own bed. But we need to get desensitized to that number jumping around all the time, especially when we think about our female population, when we think about people who have a little bit more eating out, water fluctuations are huge. So if I take a look at my female population, we go through this discussion going, hey guys, look, we've mapped out. You weighed in every single day for 2 months maybe before we go into this build. And we're in a little bit better spot too. Okay, we've got tightened up in our target range. We know what this looks like. Look, if we look at the last 8 weeks in review, every week you had your cycle, you're up 1.5 pounds and you freaked out. You got on the phone with me, you're like, Laura, I'm gaining weight. My clothes don't fit. This is awful. And I go, cool. Emma, let's talk again next week. And the next week, oh, my clothes fit great. Like I'm feeling good. And we go, okay, cool. So you remember last week we had these feelings about our scale being super high and now it's back to low. And then we zoom out and we're like, oh, we're basically at a flat trend line. So we go into a build acknowledging it's not going to look linear. So even though I'm talking about gaining 1, maybe 2 pounds a month, that's not going to look like 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. It's going to look like +1, -0.2, +1.5, -1. And when we zoom out, we go, hey, it looks like a pound, but we're also probably going to see some pretty significant spikes here and there because you are trying to often in around cycle and ovulation, you are gaining weight at the same time your water fluctuations going up. So you might have a day in there where you're like, I gained 3 pounds on one day. We go, cool. We've been tracking, so we knew to expect this. Like, that the day before your cycle starts, you're going to have a 3 pound weight fluctuation. It's going to even exacerbate it because we're eating 400 carbs right now. So those are things that we discussed going into it. So do you have that expectation? You're like, oh, I don't like that feeling, but I also knew to expect this was going to happen at some point. So getting a little bit more desensitized to having that scale number show up every single day and going, okay, I know how my body reacts to these things. I know how my body reacts when I go to the movies and eat a large bag of popcorn that's super salty and buttery and delicious. The next morning, I'm going to expect that 2 pound fluctuation on the scale. And if I can expect that, I will be desensitized to how that makes me feel.
Yeah, because I agree. I do find that in a building phase like this, when you are consuming more calories, I do feel like those numbers do seem to be a little bit more kind of all over the place. So you have to be careful with that. And I found to just kind of zooming out being the big thing here, right? And looking, like you said, more so maybe from a fat loss perspective, we're looking at that weekly average, whereas here we're kind of looking at, hey, what's that average from a month standpoint, right? Where's that
Yep.
that trending? Because that's going to be a better indicator there than again the week trends. Okay, so it sounds like so rate of gain, you said around a pound per month. What is that typically? Are you more so concerned about that rate of gain, or are you more so looking at calories there, right? In terms of like the exact calories of what someone's going to add, or do you kind of be flexible and more so just look at
Mm.
that rate of gain?
So let me just add a little clarity here. When I'm talking about rate of gain, I'm saying a pound, but in reality, what I'm thinking that generally looks like for most people is an eighth to a quarter% of body weight gain per week. So
Right.
for the majority of our population, that looks to be about a pound to a pound and a half a month. So we're specifically looking at percentages of your starting body weight. So a smaller person might be a little bit less, and a larger person might be a little bit more. So I'm not quite saying it's exactly 1 pound, but for all intents and purposes. So when we are building in a model for going, hey, here's our rate of gain that we're targeting. And we lay it out. So every single client goes, hey, here's our target rate of gain. So the majority of females, that's 0.2 to 0.4. That lands us in that roughly 1 pound per month. What's that look like? It looks like an additional 100 to 150 calories. And so my goal is that we set a calorie range. For example, let's call it 24, 2,500. My goal that 90% of your days land in that range. And then we zoom out on what does your 3 week average look like. So it's one of those things where we can't really make decisions on a week or two of data because of those water fluctuations we were just talking about. So when we look at that calorie range, I'm like, okay, were you adherent, consistent? Did your carbs fluctuate a ton? Or did you have any crazy activity days where you decided to go hike up a mountain and get 30,000 steps and have a ton of inflammation going on your system? So it's a very holistic picture that we're looking at. And also not just scale weight, but photos and measurements too. Ask, hey, are you making progress in the gym? Are your lifts going up? Are you getting more reps? Are you adding more weight? If we look at that big picture and go, hey, my lifts are going up, my circumference measurements on all my muscled areas, so I'm looking like hips, aka like, and I have my clients measure, especially the females, not necessarily just hip measurement, but how do you get the like widest part of your glutes? So it's a slightly angled measurement. Um, our glutes going up, our thighs going up, our arms going up, like are all those muscled areas going up? Cool. Lifts are going up in the gym, scales trending upwards. Like, okay, we're checking all the boxes right now. So it's not just the scale, but we definitely, if the scale's flat, then I'm gonna say we gotta eat more too.
Yeah. Well, I kind of had this conversation. I don't know if it was with Brian last week or I can't remember who I had it with, but basically, when it comes to muscle growth, people really want that. And maybe it was even you that we had this conversation. People want that like exact thing that's going to tell them that they're gaining muscle, right? And I do think it's a little bit harder to tell, for sure if you're gaining muscle.
Mm-hmm.
But we kind of just have to trust the process, right? And like you said,
Yep.
kind of check the boxes. And that's where again you kind of look at where that rate's trending over or rate that where that weight gain is trending over time or where your weight's trending over time. I don't know why I have such a hard time saying that. And then are you checking all those boxes? And we can be pretty safe that you're, building muscle, but really then how quickly that happens is going to come down to your genetics. But if we check off those boxes, you're putting yourself in a good spot there. And like you said, at the very least, we want to make sure we're not seeing that weight trend down in that process. So a couple of things you kind of mentioned throughout, and just want to pick your, just kind of get your thoughts on a little bit more. So one thing that you mentioned is, hey, body fat percentage really isn't something that I'm overly concerned about. But then you did mention too that like people that are overweight as well. So like, what is that kind of range, and like where does that cutoff end up kind of being at for you typically?
Totally. Man, I don't know if I could give a specific percentage because honest, I don't have my woman go get tested.
Right.
That percentage number, first of all, we know that any in-body, which is a little bit more accessible to most of our population, is 8 to 12% error rate. So I don't want somebody who's 25% going in going, oh, it said 35%, like I can't do this anymore. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to give you a specific number, but when I say my goal is pretty much, you know, our population comes to us because they think they're overweight for the most part, and they want to get to a leaner body mass. So anybody in the generally overweight category, I still push to at least, hey, I want you to test this. We want to find that upper limit of maintenance. We want to go, what does it feel like to lift heavy for the first time? I can name probably 15 clients in the last year who are in the category who might consider themselves, I have no business being in surplus. I am a female, I'm over 200 pounds, and I have no business doing this. And I'm like, hey, let's just test it. We pushed, of those 10 females I'm listening to, they lost weight the entire process. Like we could not eat enough to actually, because they fed themselves for the first time. Like we got up into the 2,900, 3,000 calories. I'm like, okay, we're just gonna hang here. Like I'm not gonna make you force feed yourself at this point. But every time we try to push calories and you're training hard, your consistency is better. Everything is trending downwards. I'm like, okay, we'll just stay here. Like we couldn't actually get ourselves into a build because they had never been in that metabolic state of like, oh wow, training is in a good space, sleep is in a good space. My calories are in a quality place where I need them to be in a healthy environment. So it's not always what happens. But I do like to push everybody into that spot. And I say the only people that I wouldn't are like when we move from overweight to obese category.
And you're talking the BMI category specifically, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I do think again, I think that overweight one, like, again, people hear that and they kind of freak out, but it's like, I mean, you're still, if you can do the things that we talk about, you're probably fine. Like, but like you said, once you kind of get to that obesity part, it's like, okay, you probably don't have as much muscle as you think there. And it's like, it is a body fat thing. You probably do need to bring it down. So again, kind of being in that overweight there, but it sounds like more so what it sounds like for you is, again, your main thing you're trying to do here is just get people to not eat super low calorie and like get out of that kind of mindset. And like, and that's, you said this doesn't happen every time, but again, for some people, you find that you really have them increase their calories. Now they're in a better spot, like metabolically, everything like that, that, you know, they're consuming more calories, they're able to push training. And for some people, they end up kind of seeing their weight trend down, and you're not necessarily like, again, depending on their body fat percentage and where they're at, knowing that we don't have exact numbers, you may just let that person stay there and kind of reap some, maybe whether that be recomp or whatever it may be at that standpoint, even though they're technically should
Losing.
be in a
Yeah.
build, right?
Yes. Yeah. When we get to that point where, I mean, I just can think of the client I just got off the phone with, Amanda, and Kate, two gals in this category where they're on the upper cusp there going, okay, we're on the border here, but they're like, I want to build muscle. I know it's important for me. And right now I'm not in a business. I have zero business being in a fat loss phase. Like it's the holidays. I'm a nurse. I'm working night shift. Like we have all these things that say, hey, like right now is not the time to be in fat loss phase. I'm like, cool. All right, Amanda, let's just keep pushing food until we can, what does that top look like? And we got to 2,900 calories and she's like, I literally physically can't eat anymore. I'm like, okay, well, let's just hang here. She's at a like 0.3 negative trend line right now for the last 2 months. I'm
Damn.
like, hey, we will just ride this off into the sunset until you're ready to actually go into a fat loss phase, and then it's going to be cake. So
Yeah, so you would just keep her there for a while, and then, like you said, and would you? Yeah, I guess just kind of, I mean, almost like you said, kind of milk out those that milk it out essentially, right? I mean, you might as well. There's really no reason to not do that. But you aren't trying to get her up to say 3,100 just because, again, it'd be at that point kind of like force feeding in a way, and that's probably
yep.
something that you're trying to avoid with like the force feeding side of things.
Exactly. And also she's a younger mom. I've worked with her for over 2 years and this happens every single time we go into a build. Every single time. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like it's not an anomaly. I'm not just giving you, oh, like I've worked this on two-person for 2 months and now she's losing weight no, I've seen her food logs for 2 years. Like this is a known phenomena that we've been working towards. And yeah, I mean, we could try to get to 3,100. And then I'm gonna tell you, like, if as you are, a young dad, she's a young mom, her daughter is in kindergarten and she comes back with every single bug every third week or so. So it's a fight to even keep that 2,900 up when you're bringing home a stomach bug and then the flu and then, the ick as
Yeah.
it is.
Cool. Yeah. So again, it sounds like, main thing, hey, we just want to really try to get people to eat a bit more. And again, for some people that may look like you gain a little bit of weight, so long as it's not like just coming up super quick. But that's the main thing, right? We just want to get people kind of out of this thing. Because I guess where, when you hear maintenance, maybe I guess the thought is for some people, they hear that and then they think that their weight's going to stay like exactly the same. And then they kind of end up under eating, I guess, a little bit more. Is that kind of where you see the biggest kind of issue with that kind of thought process would be if someone was like, hey, I'm going to build at maintenance or whatever it may be?
Yes. So let's actually circle back to our scale fluctuation conversation. I think the biggest barrier that I see for women going to actually eat at what I'll call true maintenance, not adaptive maintenance, because we spent all this time dieting, is they get scared when they don't know how their body's going to react to things. They don't understand why the scale flexes up. a pound or two when they eat a little bit more carbs a day or they have a little bit of inflammation. So the first time they go to do it on their own, go, okay, well, I've been eating 1,700 calories, but like I've been told that my maintenance should be 2,000, 2,100 because I looked at a calorie calculator, and they go eat 2,000 and the scale flexes up 2 pounds because they ate 75 more carbs. And they're like, it's on my maintenance, I'm gaining weight. And then they go back down to 1,700. And that is
Yep.
a hand holding that we do in our, and when we talk to clients, they're like, okay, hey guys, I'm going to tell you, we are going to increase carbs, and I need you to expect that your maintenance weight is going to be 1 to 2 pounds higher for every 50 grams of carbs additional that we're eating right now. And when they have that expectation, I'm like, hey, you're going to look the same. We're going to do measurements. It's all going to look the same. You just have to expect that maybe we're at 150 right now, and we might be maintaining at 153 to 154 if we increase calories by 4 to 500. And I mean a flat trend line. And so when we go into that expectation, that's the part where most people don't get over that hump on their own. And so they continue to sit at 1,700 calories and go, okay, well, why am I not main gaining? Why am I not building? Well, it's like we're really not eating like to what we can be eating. And so sometimes forcing people into a build makes us realize what that top threshold is, because they might add that 200 calories and be like, okay, I'm in a build now. Gone from 1,700 to 1,900. And then 3 weeks later, they're like, oh, I just bumped 2 pounds like in the first 3 days, and I've been flat ever since because I have a little bit more glycogen. And then we make another bump. And then all of a sudden, we've spent 12 weeks trying to gain weight, and they've gained a half a pound because they were so adapted lower and were afraid of those scale fluctuations when they came up.
Yeah, no, I see that. Again, it's kind of the messaging of what is maintenance. I do see a lot of people get that wrong, where they think that it's, again, if you say, hey, build a maintenance, they see their weight go up 1 or 2 pounds and they drop back down to these lower calories, and then it ends up being that vicious cycle. And then now it's like you're trying to maintain whatever you called it, but then you're still in this like low calorie state because you're so scared to see that weight trend up just a little bit. And as you said there, you'll have it where you'll bump it up a little bit. You see their scale weight come up a little bit. But again, it's just filling out a little bit, right? And then I've seen that happen multiple times too, where you do that for a couple of weeks, and then, like you said, now things start to trend back down. It's like, okay, now we can bump it up, and then people end up being at higher amounts of calories than they thought. And then again, it was because of that mindset around the scale and being like, hey, I'm going to maintain, so I have to keep weight the exact same there. So I see where you're coming from with that. That makes a ton of sense with that. Am I on the right track there with that in terms of your thought process on that?
Yeah,
got you. Okay, cool. I would imagine too then that, like, in this kind of, based on that kind of conversation that we just had, I feel like that kind of changes this kind of question. But I would imagine in terms of like muscle gain goals too, right? I mean, I'm assuming that's something that you would take into consideration, or is that not anything that you're going to take into consideration here in in a build in terms of how much muscle somebody wants to feasibly build?
Yes. So obviously you work with a natural population here, and we, instead of working on like specific timelines of like, or goal pounds, it's a little bit more go, what does our timeline look like? What does our year look like? How do we maximize muscle building? Like if your goal, and I've heard this from, like, it's now kind of caught fire in my client community, if they want to be all little balls of muscle, like that is that's the catchphrase. Like, I want to be a little ball of muscle. I'm like, cool. All right. So how do we maximize our year to do that? So it's a little bit less about a specific number of like, okay, yeah, eventually I want to look like I have this goal physique in mind that I want to be sitting at 20 to 23% body fat, plus or minus, just if we look at charts. And I want to walk around and people are like, yeah, she definitely lifts weight. So we go, cool. How do we get there? It's not necessarily a specific number per year. It's how many weeks can we possibly dedicate to being in a environment that allows us to build muscle. And we look at the calendar, we go, okay, we got 52 weeks a year. Maybe you're not feeling it. Maybe you can't do it in the summer because you're traveling too much, you're visiting family. Okay, well, we go Labor Day to maybe MLK, or Labor Day to President's Day. That's our time frame to build as much muscle as possible to maximize our year. And we go, okay, every single year we're chipping away at that. So it's more of a zoom out of, if my goal is to live in a smaller, leaner, more muscular physique, then I have to spend a majority of my year in that build phase, or as much as I can, that I also have the ability to tolerate too. So I'd say most women end up kind of tapping out around the 18 to 20 week time frame of being in a build. That's usually where the mental of going, okay, I'm gaining and like this is actually happening. Like not feeling too comfortable in my skin. So we kind of build that in and we go, okay, we're going to do what we can with our available time set. Um, but I will be frank with them, like, cool, if you have this goal of this almost physique competitor level of muscle, you got to spend more time here. And we have that conversation. I'm like, if you don't want to spend as much time in a year, it's just going to take longer. So you're extending the timeline if you aren't willing to dedicate that much time into it. But that's okay. Like, you just have to understand, like, where are my pros and cons? How do I match my like physique goals with my lifestyle? Where's that Venn diagram overlap? And it's going to take as long as it's going to take.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. There. So I guess really kind of the only I guess where I want to take this is just kind of briefly touch on kind of my thoughts on all this and my approach, and then we can kind of tie it all together here. So, I mean, I generally agree with like everything you're saying. I figured, we'd probably be on the same page here with this, right? I think the big thing is we really want to make sure people are not taking that extended period of time, like where they're just under eating, right? Because they think they're going to maintain. So taking this time outside of that and eating enough calories, I think is super important. And so what I see and typically happen is like it gets confusing when you try to talk about all this stuff on social media because, like you said, there you're gonna, people think that they're gonna keep the same exact weight, and that's not necessarily the case, right? It's like, hey, we want to get you out of this deficit. Like for me, that's the most important thing when it comes to a build is getting you out of that deficit. Right? We don't want to see that weight trend down and getting your calories up, and you may see it come up a little bit, right? And so I think that's where people kind of get scared and then they end up not doing it and then they end up being too low calories. But again, getting it up to enough calories there to where even if you see a couple pounds, it's no big deal. I guess where I've changed my mind over the long term is like, I think initially, like, and you kind of hit on this earlier, is for everyone, I think getting your weight up just slightly, again, and I'm talking like whether that be water weight fluctuation or actually pushing a little bit of weight gain. And I'll kind of talk about where I think people really would benefit from, being in a surplus, but it's more so like getting you to a certain weight and being in a range where you feel good and your calories are high enough. And then kind of like, then I feel like you can stay a little bit closer to maintenance versus like having these builds. Cause I've done this in the past for myself where we do these builds where you're just, I thought you always needed to be in a calorie surplus all the time. And then I would push weight a little too high, right? And then I would have a little bit extra body fat to lose. And really it just comes down to, I think, your personal preference on that anyways. And so that's where I've changed my mind on the most in the last little bit is like, hey, let's have that period of time where you do gain a little bit, but then let's find that range where you're feeling like training is going well, you're eating plenty of calories, you don't feel restricted, you're feeling good, biofeedback's in a good spot, and then we can kind of milk that out. And you can really, I feel like, stay there as long as you really want there. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that you've done? What do you think of that kind of approach?
So let me just play back to you what I heard. So you're saying, okay, I've done the build. I know what that feels like to gain. And then once you're in that positive spot, you can go back to, okay, I'm going to say like maintenance plus where I'm like very, very slow gaining, or like, I'm just going to hang at, 180 for the next few months until my next fat loss phase.
Yeah, you kind of have like a range, right? Where it's like, again, you're not necessarily trying to push weight up, but if it comes up a little bit here and there, it's no big deal. You're just kind of in a range and you're more so sitting in that range versus like, hey, we need to continue to push and see your weight trend up, say week over week or month over month, right? And again, the thing is you're probably still going to see it come up a little bit anyways. So it's not like, hey, you're at 180 now. We exactly need to stay at 180 that entire time. But yes, I guess the thought is you're really slowing down that weight gain once you get to a certain spot. And that's going to be different for every single person, right? I don't think it's necessarily going to be the same for someone, right? If somebody's like super lean, if it's a super lean guy and they want to build as much muscle as possible, well, we're probably going to be gaining for a lot longer time. Same thing with women. If you're super, super lean and you want to have a good amount of muscle, we're probably going to be gaining a lot longer. But, if you're in this moderate body fat and it's like, hey, you did a fat loss phase, you've been low calorie for a long period of time, let's get you to increase your calories. Maybe you see your weight, let's say you're 150, maybe it comes up to 155 to 160. Once we kind of get there, it's like, and again, these are just numbers that I'm throwing out. Once you kind of get there, then we just kind of slowly just kind of milk out as much time in that 155 to 160 as possible. We just don't want to see things trend down there, right? That's kind of more so what I was getting at, right? It's like you put on a little bit of weight, but does that make sense? Again, there's so many different ways we can go about this.
Totally. So let's think about it the way that I chat about with my clients, but that's like when we set yourself up for a build, or even like we have to like actually find what that top end of maintenance is. We did the stair stepping and we've overcome that top end of maintenance and move into a build, I let you set a top line number. You're like, okay, in your case, you start at 150 or the example I just gave, and you're like, I 5 pounds. Like I will do this, but like 155 is my top line. That's when you go, hey, cool, we can tap out. We know what the top end of your maintenance is, and let's go live there until you're in a space to do your next fat loss phase. So I completely agree. If you have a top line number, especially in our more overweight category, they usually, like most ladies, pick like 5 to 10 pounds, where they're like, okay, I have 20 weeks until I am in a good position where I can do another fat loss phase. If I hit that number at week 12, which is unusual, but if it does happen, if I hit the number week 12, then we go, cool, you're going to hang at maintenance for the next 8 weeks until we are in that timeline or position where we know that we're set up for a successful fat loss phase. So yeah, I'm totally in alignment on that piece. As long as you set yourself that minimum or that kind of weight where I want to cruise at is above. It's not like 1 or 2 pounds where like, hey,
Right.
you could eat 50 carbs and you're going to hit that number.
Exactly.
So yes, I definitely think there's a spot for that population of like, I just want you to know what this feels like, and then you get to decide. You're in the driver's seat right now. Like if you've picked a top line number, that's what we call it here is like, okay, what in the number that I don't want to see as a weekly average. So we can't call it New Year's Day number, which is the, post margaritas and a salted brisket at 10 p.m. at night, and then be like, oh, I hit my top line number. No, that doesn't count. I say that from my experience because I hit that on New Year's Day last year. So when we go, I think there's a time and a place for that piece too. Like once you've done it, you've felt what it feels like to build muscle. What does it feel like to be in a calorie surplus? You're consistent in it. You built the muscle. You felt the things. You're like, all right, but I've hit this number. I think I just want to cruise here until my next fat loss phase. Whether that's 4 to 10 pounds above where we started, totally aligned.
Gotcha. Yeah. Because like I said, I mean, from my experience and just working with other like clients in the past too, like it was like, oh, hey, you need to just always be in the surplus. And like I said, I've gotten to the point to where I probably put on a little bit more weight than I needed to. And then it's like, now then you're trying to get rid of some of that in the fat loss phase. Right. And then you don't, and so I just feel like it can be a cycle there. But again, the big thing is like, we need to make sure we take this period of time to eat enough. And I think the big overarching takeaway is like, you just want to get out of that really low calorie amount. And your maintenance calories can end up being, you can end up eating a lot more calories than you think in that process. But yeah, no, I just have found that approach to work, and that's kind of how I change it. And I also feel like the plus side of that too is, and you kind of mentioned it, like we can really hang out there. Like if things are going well, like you're progressing training, you're eating enough protein, you're doing all the things. Like I feel like you can really hang out there for as long as you want, and then you can run that fat loss phase. And then again, I'm sure at some point, if you do that regularly and you are productive in those build phases, you're probably going to get to the point to where you will need to be more or you need to be in a surplus more than maybe in the past as well too, right? But again, finding out what that level is for you there, I think is super important. But yeah, I think the women that come into you and they're eating 1,800 calories and they don't want to go any higher than that, and they're worried, like, yes, they need to eat more calories for a period of time. I think that's going to do way more. It's going to be way better for their physique long term than trying to stay at 1,800 would for forever. So.
And I think the mental reframe too of I know that I'm intentionally going to gain weight so that I can build muscle helps push to go, what does that top look like? Versus, okay, I know I just need to find my top end of maintenance. So we have group cohorts of coaching where clients can choose like an intro, they start in the maintenance track or they start in a muscle building track. And the women who like are mentally dialed in going, okay, like I've signed up for this muscle building cohort. I'm going to see that scale go up. They tend to be a little bit better and more aggressive at actually finding that top end. Whereas the women who are like, I know that my scale might go up in maintenance, but like I'm not prepared for it. The muscle building cohort finds that top end place and sits a little happier faster because they're like, I'm invested in understanding that this is going to go up. And if you've made that decision mentally of, okay, I want to find out how many calories, what are the max amount of calories I can eat? When do I actually start gaining? They tend to be a little, the psychological piece is really important when it comes to finding what that actually looks like versus the 1,800 calories. Like, yeah, I know I like want to find out how much I can eat, but I'm not really accepting that the scale is going to fluctuate. Like that piece is a little bit harder to have that conversation with. So that's why really, when it comes into the application versus outcome, even going, hey, you and I are making a contract together. We're going to do this 12-week build because I want you to find out what that number is. And that's kind of like from the coaching perspective. I know we're very aligned on that where you're like, how do I get you, client, to eat more than 1,800 calories. Like, okay, well, I'm going to tell you that we're going to do a build. You might not see a build till week 10 in reality because we're doing this stair step method, but yet you finally committed to pushing it and you found out what for yourself what that looks like.
Yeah, and I think you feel better, overall health improves too if you kind of get out of that kind of low calorie mindset, which I think is super important. What are some maybe kind of like mistakes that you see made in this process of like, bringing people into starting to consume a little bit more calories? This can be mentally, physically, actual food choices, stuff like that.
Yeah, so the food quality is probably the number one mistake. And I see it goes one of two ways. Either one, they've gotten so used to eating diet style food the entire time that they try to increase 200 calories. Like, I absolutely cannot. I'm going to pop because I decided to get my entire 200 calories from cauliflower, rice, and spinach. And you're like, well, yeah, you don't, you're going to have some digestive distress. So they either go this way and they're like, I can't possibly eat more food. This isn't possible. I'm just going to stay at 1,800 for the rest of my life. I'm like, well, have we thought about real rice, not cauliflower rice? Or option two is to go, cool, I am going to eat 200 more calories. And then it turns into 500 more calories of Snickers a day. And we go, all right, that's not not the method that we're trying to go either, because 200 calories really isn't much, especially if we spread it across 3 meals. It's a little extra rice, maybe a piece of chocolate, et cetera, et cetera. So the food quality aspect in your first kind of foray into a build is one of those things that's actually the hardest to dial in. You're like, okay, I have this calorie range. It's really not that much more. I just need to eat a little bit more at each meal. And so we really talk about scaling. That's what I should go. Like, keep your meals looking the same. Just how do you scale each meal to be 50 calories more per day? So does that look like you normally ate the thin slice bread at breakfast? Now you're getting the regular size bread at breakfast. Are you, normally 3 ounces of rice, now I go to 4 ounces of rice. So things like that are one of the more critical things to going, okay, how do I dial that piece in? Because it's hard to keep that tight calorie range if you're trying to 100% incorporate a bunch of really fun foods in. Until we get to that satiation point where I have to incorporate fun foods, because if I only eat whole foods, I'm going to have a problem. So that's probably the biggest. You either go one of two ways, and we tend to see that, the first 4 to 6 weeks is just a little bit of a roller coaster of okay, guys, here, once you get that quality satiety piece down. And then the second piece that sometimes comes up is the cognitive dissonance between what I think I'm doing and what I'm doing. They're going, okay, I know that, oh yeah, I'm pushing hard in the gym. Like, cool, send me a photo, send me a video, post it. Show me your one RIR. And they post a video and I'm like, there's 8 in the tank there, my friend. Until you start squinching your face and making ugly faces, we're not pushing hard enough. So there's cognitive dissonance there, or, oh yeah, I'm totally hitting my targets 7 days a week. And I'm like, pull up what the last 7 days were. And I'm like, 5, maybe 3 out of 7 days were actually hit. And so we do have that conversation piece too of going, what does consistency actually look like versus what you think it looks like?
Yeah, no, those are good points. And I was wondering if you're going to bring up the food quality one there, because that is the big one that I see. Especially I feel like for people that, let's say they come in eating those 800 calories, 1,800 calories, or 800 calories probably too. It's the food choice thing, right? And like you said, it ends up kind of swinging one way or the other there, where it's like they're trying to eat, all their quote unquote diet foods all the time, and it's like, yeah, you're not going to be able to eat, you're not going to be able to eat enough calories because of that. I actually had a guy talk to me, ask me a question the other night. So this happens with guys too, right? This isn't just a female thing. Like, guys do the same thing where, they want to stay super lean and try to build muscle. And it's like, dude, you got to eat more. And he was asking me about, he's like, how do do I need to increase, or do I need to have less nutrient dense type foods? I'm like, yeah, I mean, if you're having trouble eating enough calories, you do need to probably put in some more calorie dense stuff, right? And again, for some people, depending on how much energy you're expending, maybe it is a little bit of some tasty foods, like you said, some Snickers, but also, I think we also forget, hey, maybe we switch to a less lean, like ground beef, or maybe we switch to chicken thighs versus chicken, or maybe a little bit more avocado. Shoot, the easiest one, olive oil, right? I mean, something like adding in a little bit of olive oil, which again, you got to be careful with that. But yeah, that's a big one I see. And then on the flip side, it's the too much tasty food, right? Then it's like, now it's going to be super easy to overeat. You're going to feel like you're eating 1,800 calories, but you're actually eating 3,000. So you kind of need to watch out for that. And then the last point you made too was also a good one too. Are you actually doing again, like I'm assuming when you say they're not adhering, it's like they're having 3 days where maybe they're under eating or overeating, but they're not actually hitting the goal the target goal that you have there for that in the training side of things too.
Totally. And so that's one of the things where, I mean, as a more like data driven coach, we have a shared spreadsheet and I go, hey, like, tell me which days, like, rate yourself. Like, I want you to look at your data and go, hey, what days did I actually do what I said I was going to do? Like, how many green check marks can I put? Can I do 7? That's awesome. Can you 6? Also great. If you're doing 3, we got a little bit of a problem here. And whether that's quantity of workouts per week or number of days hitting your targets, that's just something that I think it's very easy. And people, again, go one of two ways. They're like, oh, I was incredibly consistent. And you look at them, they were consistent 2 days a week. Or they're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be failure. My build's going to fail. And I look at it, I'm like, you were 100 calories off one day. Every other day is on target.
You're
Like,
fine.
you're fine. So again, there's definitely two psyches there of what does consistency look like. And there's the type A's who are freaking out because one day they're over by 50 or under by 50. And then there's the not type A's and they're like, yeah, totally. I'm like, go with the flow. I'm cruising. And I'm like, maybe pump the brakes a little bit. But you're right on the guy side. Like one of my male clients responded to my story yesterday. He's like, "How did you eat 400 carbs in a day? That's impossible." And I was like, "It's not possible
Be
when
done.
you it can't be done." I'm also literally half your size, my friend. But that's definitely a conversation that's always come up too. Like, "Oh, well, how do you do that?" I'm like, "Well, I didn't eat chicken breast and rice for all my meals. Like I had to, do a little orange juice, had a Pop-Tart, a couple things you have to do when your calories get up that high as well."
It's funny, a lot of people kind of like portray it as like this is just like a female thing that but I'll tell you what, man, the guys, they do the same freaking thing, like, and I think it's almost just as bad. I've had multiple guys that we've had to really work on increasing their food because they just undereat or in the kind of quote unquote diet culture there. What about calorie cycling during with a surplus? Is that something that you ever implement or because again, I would assume that you could see that get taken too far as well too.
Can you define calorie cycling
Yeah.
in this context?
Calorie cycling just being you have some days where you're eating a little bit more, you're having some days where you're a little bit less, you're just kind of looking at your average caloric intake for the week there.
So, no. I'll tell you, I do team no low days. If you set a minimum for yourself, that's the minimum you're going to hit every single day of the week, barring some extraneous circumstance. The reason why is it 100% gets bastardites. And as we know, like our clients are training 3 to 4 days a week. I mean, if MPS is elevated for up to 48 hours, you're leaving gains on the table if you have a low day in there. And especially as it is, the smaller you are, the less percentage of muscle you can get to gain. Like if you're only spending 12 weeks in a build, you want to squeeze every piece out of that 12 weeks. If you are only, oh, I'm going to just eat on a surplus on the days that I'm training and then be at maintenance the other days because I kind of don't, that just tends to backfire. And then those maintenance days tend to be even lower calorie days. Like, oh, I don't really want the scale to go up, but I'm just going to eat more on my, and then you get into this very negative feedback loop. And I go, okay, well, wait a minute. You just left. If you're only eating a surplus on the days you're training, you just cut your 12 weeks build into 6 weeks. And then if we go back to that 1,800 calorie person, they might not actually have a good metabolic outcome because they didn't push their calories every single day of the week. So I definitely see a bigger difference of the one who are super consistent, have that tight calorie range every single day of the week. Like I'm never going to have a low day, whatever you set that minimum at, versus trying to calorie cycle. It's not something I like to implement. Plus, and then the other thing that tends to, especially we, again, attract a lot of type A's. If you are calorie cycling and your training sessions in the afternoon and you somehow, like something comes up and you're like, oh, my kid got called out of school sick. Like I couldn't hit my training session, but it was a high calorie day. Now what do I do? Like the mental freak out that happens is not worth it. Like it's too much to like deal with. I'm not a big fan of it. Like year round, the only kind of calorie cycling we do is if for your performance day. So say you're in a build and then you go for a large hike or you go snowboarding where you're like the expenditures might higher. I'm like, cool. My minimum's 2,700 right now. My minimum on a snowboarding day is 3,000. Like you get to eat more, but we're never eating less than that minimum. I just don't see a great psychological benefit from it. I say that is for the general population of clients that come to me. Do I think that there's probably some utility for leaner, more advanced athletes who have spent a lot of time in maintenance? Sure. I definitely think, especially when we talk about, hey, in your scenario, we're like, I kind of want to just hang at this maintenance, or I'm going to be a maintenance plus, or I don't really feel like I need to do a true build. you're like, I'm okay with leaving a little bit of gains on the table right now. Awesome. Most of my clients, 95% of them are not at that spot yet. And I don't think it's a mental, psychological, or physical utility to help them get to their goals.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on the calorie cycling. I think if anything, like you said, it's like, hey, we want to have this minimum. We don't want to dip underneath that. But if you have days where you do expend a lot more energy, maybe those are days that you are increasing your calories. Because I feel like that is a misapplication of this phase, and a mistake that I see a lot of people make is they'll have these days where they eat, this is usually when they're doing a build phase on their own, right? They're like, hey, I need to be in a surplus. So they have these days where they just eat anything and everything, right? They eat a ton of calories, or they go out and they have 3,800 calories, 4,000 calories, and their goal is, say 3,000 or whatever it may be. And the next day they're eating 1,500. Whether they do that on purpose or subconsciously, you end up being in this, like, you have these really high days and you have these really low days. And it's like, yeah, your calories for the week average out. But,
Mhm.
I think long term, that's going to be a detriment to your body composition if you take that approach, right? Where you have these really low days and you have these really high days there. And I just feel like that's kind of the approach that people take on their own when they do these phases. And then it's like, oh, this didn't work for me. I need to eat 1,800 calories all the time, right? And it's like, well, then it's probably your approach to it that is the biggest thing there.
Well, honestly, like okay, so let's take that example. You're having the 3,000 calorie day on Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, Saturday, and they're like, ooh, I need to hit my average. I'm going to drop 1,500. That is what we call a recipe for fat gain here. So it is you're calling it a build right now because your calories are above average. And I'm calling it yo-yo dieting because if you go in that example, which we see so many clients come in from, like I'm thinking of my client Noah, like, I don't know, I think he's 6'4" football player up in New York. He came to me eating 2,400 calories a day, Monday through Friday. And then question mark on the weekend. He didn't want to track his food because he'd go out with his buddies and young football player in the city. Like, I'm pretty sure there was when I walked there was like 2 pitchers of beer and 3 pizzas, like something absurd on every Friday and Saturday. And I was like, let's just write down what we ate. And it was 6,000 calories every Friday, Saturday, and 2,000 on the weekdays. And his body comp was not going the direction I wanted to. I was like, no, let's just take the average. Like, eat 3,000 calories a day. I don't care if you eat 6,000 on the weekends. We'll eventually get to that place with like no low days. And the recomp that happens when you actually eat enough at maintenance versus he was gaining fat, eating low calories the rest of the week, even though it all averaged out because your body tends to adapt down to those low calorie days. And when it's adapting down, therefore, when you have a very, very high surplus, it's a more of an automatic fat gain. Whereas if you have a minimum surplus every single day of the week, you're like, I'm just going to eat this 100, 200 calorie surplus. The propensity for that 100, 200 calories to be mostly muscle, far, far, far higher. Like that P ratio is much, much better when you're in a little bit of a surplus every single day of the week versus 1,000 calorie surplus one day of the weekend because you are, I'm not going to use the word starvation mode because it's not a real thing, but if you're adapting down, if the majority of your week is in a deficit because you're making the averages hit, you are adapting down maintenance and then you're signaling to your body like, hey, I don't know when that food is going to come. So if any day I'm in surplus, I'm going to store every single extra calorie as body fat. And so that team no low days is exactly to avoid that piece. We do not want to be storing extra body fat because we're having this crazy calorie cycling going on. We eat to hit our goals and then eat more if your expenditure tends to be higher than your baseline.
Yeah, and I think with that, I think people do it like on purpose. And when I say on purpose, they do it where they have those high days and then they go super low, right? But I also think that I see it where it's on accident, right? And this more so is for people who don't really track, right? They're just like they have those like, hey, I need to eat to gain, so they eat a ton, and then they subconsciously eat less, right? So I think there's two different you'll
Mm-hmm.
see two different ways that typically will show up. But I agree. I think if anything, it's going to be worse for your body composition, and I feel like that's again that's another thing that leads people to not ever want to do anything like this because they've done it this way, but it's more so their methods that cause them this versus actually being in a small surplus or being in a building phase there. So cool. Let me see if there was anything else I wanted to go over real quick before we kind of tie everything together. So I guess if someone isn't gaining enough, or again maybe they're gaining a little bit too much, what's typically the kind of like the troubleshooting there with that?
So I'd say first, if the scale isn't going the direction we want, I'd make sure we're checking all the boxes. Like, are we relatively consistent in our 100 to 200 calorie range? If we're not, let's bring that consistency in first. Are we gathering enough data? Are we on track days? Are we not that great at guesstimating our meals out? Like how many of those meals out are actually tracked well? If we go, okay, all those boxes are checked, like we're training well, our consistency is there, then we have plenty of data to be like, okay, we need to pull back or we need to increase. Maybe something happened on the lifestyle side. Like I see this right around this time of year, everybody's steps are starting to slow. And so we're actually pulling back on a few of their build phases because it's cold out. And we're talking about, weather out here when it's 22 degrees, you don't feel like getting as many steps in. So that's something that we might gauge too. It's like, okay, if your steps aren't going to go up, and that's just because of this time of year and our rate of gain is now increasing, then let's pull those calories back to match where activity is. So it just depends, but I'd say first things first is like, what does our consistency look like? Are we fairly consistent? Have we kind of checked out our boxes? Then we might need to make a calorie adjustment. But I want to check those things first. Like, is our data in a good spot? If our data is in a good spot, then we know we need to make a calorie adjustment.
Gotcha. Yep. Looking at that, always looking at adherence, right? I think that's always the big thing is the adherence side of things. People are too quick to jump to calorie adjustments when it's an adherence thing there before you do that. But again, there could be some things that are going on, like you said, movement could be down and they don't even realize it. So looking at that, and then we're going to make that adjustment if need be there. So cool. I think we hit everything pretty well. I just kind of want to wrap everything up and kind of have some takeaways here. I'll give you my takeaways and then you can change any that you want and then maybe give your takeaways too. So I think kind of to wrap it up, I think the big kind of takeaway is, we want to be careful with this, like eating too little and not gaining any weight. Once you do increase your food a little bit, you are going to see a little bit of a weight gain. So don't let that deter you. It's not that you're out of, it's not that you're in this large surplus or anything like that. That's just going to typically happen. So that's the big thing that we're trying to do here is just getting you out of this cycle of just eating too little because that is going to impact your progress. And again, you may think you're a maintenance, but again, it's probably more of a water weight thing that you need to get sorted out and just kind of, like you said, stay the course there. Obviously, we want to avoid that yo-yo dieting in this process too. We want to make sure we're not having those really low days and those really high days. Try to keep it relatively similar. If anything, we're going to have a minimum, and then maybe on days that we expend a little bit more, you may have a little bit more calories to work with there with that. Another thing we want to look out for is gaining too quickly. We obviously want to be careful with that thought process, but again, I would say over time, those are the big things we want to look at is making sure that we're not gaining too quickly, because then that's going to obviously set you up for a little bit more fat gain versus muscle gain. But again, understanding that, hey, you might, when you initially make increases, you may see that, and that's not necessarily fat gain that's happening there with that. Training super important as well too. We obviously want to nail the training component of it. We talked about making sure you're training hard enough. That's going to be super important in this process. And then lastly, I put this is kind of my takeaway, but I think you said at the beginning that, again, even if you're in the overweight category, you're not gonna you're still gonna have somebody eat more calories. But I still think at the end of the day, your current body composition is going to play a role in this as well too, right? Like if you are in that obese category on the higher end of the overweight, maybe we're not necessarily going to push weight gain for extended periods of time. It may be that initial calorie increase, but we're not going to necessarily push it long term. So your kind of individual context is super important. Those are my main takeaways. Did I nail them? Do you have any other ones that you want to add or that maybe I got wrong or anything like that?
Nope. I completely agree. The one thing I would add that we both very much agree on here is that it's okay to set a top line number. So we go, hey, we want you to do this, but also set something that's realistic. We know that getting out of this low calorie state and finding out what that top end of maintenance is, getting into build, chasing a little body comp change here and going, you know what? I'm okay to tap out because I did the thing. I adhered, I gained my 5 to 7 pounds, and maybe I'm not going to do this for 20 weeks a year, but I'm going to do it to the point where I have done a really hard thing and I've gotten out of this dieting mindset. So if I want to set a top line number of 5 pounds or 10 pounds or 7 pounds, that's okay. Like, yes, we all have goals, but it's okay to go, I have done it. I have mastered this. Like, it's okay to get over that fear of the scale. What does that change look like? It's a big mental gain too.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because having that top line number as well too, right? So then that way we're not again, it goes back into, then at that point it's like you're still making sure you gain a little bit, but you're also not overdoing it as well too, which we know can certainly be an issue there. Oh man, there was something I wanted to say. I hope it comes back to me here real quick on this.
Team no low days.
Team no low days. Yep. There was something that I did from gaining perspective that I wanted to go over, but I can't remember it. It'll come back to me later on. But either way, yeah, no, I think this was great. I think this will give a lot of people a ton of insight into building and how to go about it and everything like that. So, was there anything else you want to add or anything like that before I let you go?
No, I think we had a great chat today. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun. I guess one thing I want to know is, do you have anything coming up? Anything you want to add, or anything? When I say add, like anything you have coming up, or where you want to lead the audience to?
Yeah.
Here.
Coming up this weekend, I'm actually going to N1 for the nutrition design and trainability practical, which is I'm super stoked about. And then overall, I mean, we've got new cohorts launching in January, and our group training program just started a new program this week for the practical athlete. But that's what I got going on over here.
Sweet. So it did kind of come back to me, but we kind of hit on this multiple times throughout. It's just, again, I feel like if you can find, like, if you can gain a little bit of weight, and again, as long as it's higher and you find that spot where like you feel good, you're able to push training, again, biofeedback's generally in a good spot, and you're at a body comp where you're a little uncomfortable, but you're not like, overly uncomfortable. I think that's a great spot to be in. And I feel like you can milk that out really as long as you want, until you decide you want to go into a fat loss phase, as well there too. So
Yes,
last thing I want
100%.
to add.
I mean, there's 52 weeks in a year, and I think we both have a similar number of like max number of weeks in a fat loss phase. So I think you had 24, I have 20 for our clients, and um, you got to spend the rest of the year somewhere else, and it might as well be eating the most and having really great biofeedback and even chasing a little recomp at that number. Don't spend it at the low end of maintenance. Don't spend 1,800 calories. Spend it at the eating the most you possibly can, maintaining if you aren't going to be unavailable. So completely agree.
Cool. Well, we just put a nice little bow on this episode. So cool, Laura. All right. Well, enjoy and one this weekend. That'll be awesome. And we'll chat with you again soon.